Welcome to the Alpha Girl Confidence Podcast, where we are empowering youth female athletes to play and live confidently. My name is Shay Haddo, and each week I will bring you new episodes to teach you the strategies and tools that you need in order to live a confident, empowered life both on and off the playing field. What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Alpha Girl Confidence Podcast. In this episode, I sat down with past guest Sarah Cowart, who is an academic coach for college students. So the school year has started for everyone. So I thought this would be an excellent time to bring on Sarah, who is an absolute phenomenal coach. She's been on a past podcast, and so I'm so thrilled to have her back on. This episode is going to be valuable whether you're a college student, high school student, middle school student, and then obviously for parents, we dove into a lot of good stuff there. So in this conversation, we discussed, some of the biggest challenges that she sees with the students that she works with, including overwhelm, procrastination. We talked about how to manage those and also how to manage the expectations of a new school year. And then for parents too, we talked about how you can kind of help your kids to navigate that overwhelm and navigate your own expectations of your student and how to kind of talk to them out of curiosity to teach them how to think, not what to think. We talked about how kids can better manage their energy and prepare for college, whether you're, a high school student going to college or you're already in college. We talked about, time management, energy management, and then we dove into some test taking strategies as well, which I know is going to be super helpful for you. I wish that I had some of these test taking strategies back when I was in school about 1,000,000 years ago. So again, we dove into so much awesome stuff. I know academics isn't always the most exciting thing in the world to talk about, but we really did dive deep in this conversation with things that I know were going to help not only in you and your child's academics, but just in life in general. So really excited for you to dive in. Make sure you check out the show notes below for some awesome resources that Sarah has for you. All right, enjoy the episode. Hey, what's up, Sarah? Welcome back to the podcast. As we were saying before recording, it's been like 2.5 years since you were first on the podcast. So really excited to have you back. Looking forward to diving into all the school stuff now that school is up and running. So I'd love to just hear, I know a lot of the audience, they probably haven't heard our original podcast. So I'd love to hear just a little bit about who you are and how you got into what you're doing, helping students.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I still can't believe it's been that long since we chatted and are finally circling back to even have another conversation.
Right.
But just so everybody knows, my name is Sarah Cowart, and I own Sarah L. Cowart, your academic coach, which is an academic coaching practice for college students. And so we help students navigate everything that you can kind of imagine from the academic life side of things when they come off to college, whether it's study skills, time management, prioritization, organization, decision-making, all of that kind of stuff, which fall under this big fancy term called executive functioning skills. And so that's what we work with. We work with students locally in Auburn, Alabama, and State College, Pennsylvania, but then also virtually. So we have kids all the way from California to Florida up to New York.
Nice. Love it. Yeah. So how did you, and I am like trying to think back to our first conversation, like how did you get into, I believe you worked in college athletics maybe,
Yeah.
but yeah, how did you kind of get into like academic coaching? Like I think a
Yes.
lot of people don't even like know that that's a thing, right? Like,
Right.
and
And
it's
that's,
different than tutoring. So yeah, talk
yes.
about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think you just brought up a really great point. It is totally different than tutoring. We think of tutoring as subject specific. So if I'm struggling in calculus, like I want a calculus tutor. Where academic coaching really like revolves around all the other things that make students successful in and outside the classroom. And so my background is was a first grade teacher for a number of years before I went back to grad school, got a master's degree. And while I was there, found that there's this little like niche, if you will, in college athletics for an academic advisor. And I was like, oh, this is pretty intriguing, like helping students navigate all this. So I actually became an academic counselor, academic advisor for college athletes and spent about 12 years doing that. But what I really saw through that whole journey of working with these kids, it was the same thing. They were always missing kind of that same skill of time management, prioritization, organization, all of that. And what I would find, I would be in recruiting meetings with parents and they would immediately say, oh my gosh, I wish my student who wasn't a student athlete had the same resources. And so the more I got to thinking, the more I was like, okay, we need to solve this problem. How do we bridge this gap for a general population of students on campus? Which, if you think about it, we always talk about high school athletes. Only 7% of those high school athletes go on to play sports in college, right? So
Right,
when we
right.
talk about 93% of students who are high school athletes going to college, we're talking they're really having to navigate things. They're not connected to their sport as much. They're not doing all these things. But then also from just a general viewpoint, college is very different than high school. And we're having to learn
Yeah.
a lot of different skills to be successful. So that's kind of where it started. And so we launched the academic coaching practice back in the fall of 2019 and have slowly grown since then.
Yeah, I mean, I saw you actually have a bunch of like other coaches on your
Yeah.
team, and I don't think that was the case back when we first talked. So that's really cool. Obviously, there's a need and it's growing, so that's really cool to see.
Yeah, that's for sure. I think when we first initially met and talked, it was just me. And then
Yeah.
slowly it kind of started growing, and I was like, oh, I can't do this by myself. And so we actually have a team, including myself, of 8 academic coaches. Again, we have some locally here who see students in person. In Auburn,
Yeah.
we have someone who people see students in person in State College, and then we
Yeah.
have a couple of coaches who just work with our virtual students.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I mean, with school starting up, what do you find are the biggest challenges with the kids that you work with? And
Yeah,
whether like related, I know you mentioned a bunch of like executive, functioning skills. That's the term, right? Executive
that's the
functioning.
term. Yeah.
Um, I got it right. I'm like, crap, don't mess it up. So yeah, what are the biggest challenges you see with the students that you work with?
Oh man, I will tell you, when students first, especially when they're coming to college for the first time, the biggest thing we see is overwhelm. Okay, so
Yeah.
like they are so overwhelmed with all the newness that they basically freeze and don't do anything. And so,
Mm,
we're really trying to work with them to say, okay, what are some of those roadblocks that are keeping us from being successful? And I think what you work with your students on a lot is confidence. And we find when our students get super overwhelmed, that confidence level tanks and we have to
mm,
reorganize ourselves. We have to really think about, okay, what are the skills I already have and how can I use them? And so
right.
we spend a lot of time the first few weeks simply doing small time management tasks because
Yeah.
we can actually sit down and say, okay, if we get this done, then what's next? How do we prioritize? Because that's the other thing they feel in this overwhelmness is that everything has to be done right now. And we really want
Hmm.
to say, okay, well, it's not due today. So let's kind
Right.
of take a step back and see how can we reorganize everything so that you can get it all done.
Yeah. I mean, would you say that procrastination then mainly stems or a lot of the time does stem from overwhelm?
Yes. Yes, we see that so often is that sometimes the reason why kids procrastinate is
Yeah.
because A, they don't know what to do because there's so many decisions to be made that they
Yeah.
just freeze and they do nothing. And then they realize, oh no, I've done nothing. And now I have 4 zeros. And then the panic sets in, and then it's kind of like the
Yeah.
snowball effect all over again.
I mean, it's kind of similar in sports, right? Like paralysis by overanalysis, like when you're
Oh,
thinking too much and then it's like you just freeze on the field or the court. It's
yep.
kind of similar. It's like, oh my gosh, I have so much stuff to do. I don't know what to do, so I'm just not going to do anything. And then it just builds up.
Yeah, that's actually it. Is that, yeah, you look at the list and go, oh my gosh, I have 7 assignments due in the next 4 days. Plus, I need to read
Yeah.
30 pages. And by the way, I need to get to all of these other events because, even if you're not a student athlete, maybe you're part of a sorority or fraternity, maybe you're in a club, or maybe you're playing your club sport at the university
Yeah.
level. And so we're adding all these things. And then on top of that, we feel like we have so much time because maybe we only have class for 2 hours on a day. That's a really
Right.
big shift. And so we're like, oh, I have all the time in the world. And the next thing we know, it's 10 o'clock at night and your paper's due at 11:59.
Right. Yeah, I mean, like it's true too for, the girls I work with are like middle school and high school, and it's still the same kind of deal. It's still the overwhelm. It's just you as a college student, obviously you have more, it's more up to you. It's all up to you to make your own decisions and get it done. Whereas when you're in middle school, high school, you have your parents kind of like helping you with the time management and stuff like that. So like what advice would you give to parents and students that are in high school, in ways that they can start to like prepare and learn time management so that when they do get to college, they're not like all overwhelmed and stressed out?
Yeah. So a friend of mine recently posted something on social media that she was like, accountability is not babysitting. And I was like, oh,
Yeah,
okay,
it's awesome.
okay, that hits home because I think that's something we look at is we tell these students we're holding you accountable. We know
Yeah.
kind of what's going to come around the curve, and so we're really holding you accountable to stay on top of things. And I think for parents who have students still at home, it's that accountability factor. And I know we don't want to see them fail. I know we don't want them to like forget stuff and not do things, but that's part of it. Part of it is like they might skin their knee a little bit, and that's okay. Let's pick them
Right.
up and say, okay. And I had this conversation too with a parent is that we want to understand how they process information. So we're going to ask the questions of just tell me, how did you make that decision? We're not saying it's wrong or
Yeah.
right. We just want to learn how
Yeah.
you got there. And so once we kind of learn that decision making process from the student, we can say, oh, now we've got a missing link. Let's help them understand how to fix it. And usually
I
that
love
boils
that.
to, yeah, and usually it boils down to we'll say to the student, like, I want to hear how you got there, but then I'm going to tell you what decision I would have made. And let's
Mm.
see from that conversation what it is. Now, I will say we are coming from a completely different spot. We're not mom, we're not dad, we're not
Right.
grandparents. So our authoritative like spirit here is more of mentorship than it
Yeah.
is, parenting. So that
Right.
is a little bit of a challenge, but I do encourage parents, start asking those questions. And we have to ask those from a space where we're not as emotional because if
Yes,
we
just
are
like curiosity.
100% out of curiosity. So, and after the whole, whatever situation has happened and everybody's emotions have calmed down, maybe you're eating dinner, maybe you're driving to practice and you say, hey, I just want to circle back to that. Like, I just want to talk. Because I think we start to use really big language with students and be like, gosh, I
Hmm.
wish you would communicate more. Well, they don't really know what you mean by that. Like, they don't
Yeah.
know when you say
Right.
communicate, like, their style of communication is so different than yours. You like, it's almost that say, like, let's just talk. Let's just talk. I
Yeah.
want to learn. I want to learn about you. And of course, you're going to have some kids who roll their eyes in the back seat, and that's okay. But like, that's
Right.
just, yeah, but really coming from a point of curiosity.
That I love that you said that with a, like I want to know how you got to that decision. And I think that's really hits on the point of teaching kids how to think, not what to think. Right? Like teaching them like how to think critically and how to think about problems and solve problems on their own instead of teaching them just here's what to think. And I think that's such an important skill, especially now when there's so much polarity and the media and social media, like there's so much of that. And I think a lot of times kids and adults too, we don't even know how to think. We just get told what to think. So I think asking that question is a great way to start to teach kids like how to think.
Yeah,
That's
and I think that
brilliant, I
yeah,
think.
and you actually really said that critical thinking piece, and that's when we think about executive functioning skills, and we think about okay, what are all of those pieces together? That critical thinking and decision making is such a huge point of it, and how I solve a problem, and I always think back to I was in some math classes, and how I would get to the answer would be totally different than my neighbor, but they were still the
Right.
same, and then the teacher would
Mhm.
say, hey, I'm going to show you how I would do it. And we would go through, and of course, she might have a different answer, like a different way of doing it. But it's
Right.
all about finding out how are they processing information and how
Mm-hmm.
are they solving problems, because that is I would say
Yeah.
that's one of the other things we see is students don't know how to solve the problem fully because they've never been given the chance to. And so again, it's going to take them a long
Mm.
time to get there.
I love that. So like two big things I just want to like really highlight is what you just said is like they don't know how to solve problems because they've never given the chance to solve those problems because a lot of times they're solved for them. Like that's huge. And then right at the beginning, you said something along the lines of like let them kind of see what the consequences are of not doing their homework. If you're always like, holding their hand and, telling them to do it, like they'll never know what the consequence is. But sometimes maybe it's taking a step back and saying, all right, if you want to procrastinate and if don't want to do your homework, like you're going to figure out what the consequences are. And I think that can be like the consequences can be a really, really important lesson that we all need to go through.
Yeah, and that's the hardest part as a parent. That's the hardest part of
Yeah.
like you want to see your students succeed. And I have always said like I will always care more about their success than they do sometimes. Like that's just a
Yeah.
downside of me.
Mhm.
And that's something we really like I've just had to learn to go, okay, like but I think that reflects too we set our expectations on them. And sometimes
Absolutely.
our expectations aren't what their expectations are. And we have to take a step back and say, okay, again, let's figure out like if that's really what you're saying, here are the consequences of that. So if you're not going to do your homework, if you're going to end up with a D or an F in English, well, one of the consequences could potentially be like you're sitting out, especially if you're middle school, high school, you're not playing the
Mhm.
sport.
Yeah.
Okay, if that sport is
Yeah.
so important to you, then maybe you do need to sit a game. And that breaks my heart
Mhm.
as like a former athlete to be like, oh my gosh, I would never miss a game because, grades or whatever. But they do have to learn and it's so hard to watch that
Yeah.
happen. And
Yeah.
but at the same time, I think it's like you then are there to say, okay, if this is not the result you want, how can I help you stay accountable to get your work done? How can I help you without doing it for you? And then again,
Mhm.
going back to critically thinking and solving problems.
I love that. Yeah, there was a girl I was working with recently one on one, and her biggest struggle was like motivation to train, and this was in the summer, so it was mostly focused around training, right? But you can use the same idea for getting your homework done. And the thing that we kept leaning into is like, okay, what are the consequences of choosing social media over going out and training? Like just looking at the second order consequences, because so often we just like instant gratification, right? Like
Yep.
right now I don't feel like doing it, so I'm not going to be doing it. But if you can look at, okay, what are the actual consequences of not doing my homework, or of not getting my training done? Like when you think about second order, like what happens later on down the road, then you can get more clear and be like, okay, like I see what's going to happen, so now I'm going to make a decision based off that.
And I love that you even talk about like the second order of like consequences. Cause yeah, like that one first thing, it may not have an impact on you, but it's going to be what
Yeah.
happens after step two or three that then really has an
Yeah.
impact on your life. Well, because like you could stay up late watching TikToks, you miss one assignment. Well, if your assignment is only 5% of your grade, missing one, no big deal, right?
Yeah.
But then
Right.
we, in our brains, that's how we think. But then
Yeah.
we start looking and going, okay, wait, if that's 5% of my grade and I do zero assignments, the highest I can get is a 95, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then
Mm-hmm.
say there's some homework, the homework's worth another 10%. Well, you don't do any of that because you're out doing whatever or watching TikTok, being on social media. Well, then we do the math and go, oh, wait, 5% and 10 is 15. So that means now the highest grade I can get is 85. And I've not even
Mm-hmm.
taken a test. So I don't even know the information. So, and I think like I
Yeah.
already start processing that stuff because I've been doing this long enough. But then when you put that in front of the student and they're like, oh, so I'm
Oh, I
like,
get it.
you expected an A in this class, but you haven't done any of this work. So like an A is not even achievable at this point. What's
I
your
love
next
that.
goal on that? And I think that's when you start breaking it down, like you were saying, okay, here's all these steps. Then it really gets to that point of, oh my gosh, these are the consequences.
Yeah, and I think going back to the parents, I think a beautiful way that they can support is asking, hey, what are the consequences of you, putting off and it could be even, what are the consequences of you putting off your homework till the end of the night? Well, the short-term consequences are you don't get good sleep. And then the
Yeah.
consequences of not getting good sleep is you have a terrible next day. And so I think a parent can even just, instead of telling them, hey, here's the consequences, it's like asking them, hey, what do you think the consequences are? And so they can start to think critically about, because when they come to their own conclusion, it's way more powerful than it is if
Yeah.
they just are given the answer, right?
Exactly. And I think that's even after the fact, too. Like after it's already happened and you see your kid the next day is super moody. They're so tired. They come home super angry because they had a terrible day at practice. And you're like, and you're trying not to be overly emotional in it. But once they kind of calm down, go, hey, like, walk me back. Why, like, you've been feeling kind of bad today. What could cause that? Like, what's the causation of that? Oh,
Yeah.
well, I didn't get as much sleep. I woke up late. I didn't get breakfast on the way to school. I missed whatever. I didn't have my snack, and so it kind of like boils down to, well, yeah, we could have predicted you probably weren't going to have a stellar day at practice, but we're not
Yeah.
telling you that. We're letting you experience that and
Mhm.
then seeing, oh, well, what happens if I do go to bed early?
Yeah.
And
I mean, it really is just letting them connect the dots going
yeah,
backwards,
and
right?
and I will say we have to be patient because sometimes when they connect the dots a whole lot slower than we wish them to. So we just want to make sure that we all like level set on that. We're going to get to
That's
that.
true.
Yeah, we're going to get there a little faster. So let's like let them, it's going
True.
to take them a little bit extra time to get there, especially when they're
That's so
trying to
true.
do this for the first time.
Yeah, I can think of times and like when I'm coaching, I'm like trying to get them to connect the dots. And for me, it's right, it's so obvious, but then they might need a little hint here and there. And yeah, I love the like, okay, let's be patient because we don't all think the same ways. And this may be the first time that they're actually thinking about, oh, well, this is why I'm feeling this way or why I had a terrible practice or whatever it is. So I think that's very important.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you're just saying, at practice, you're sitting there going, but I've said it 7 times. And in our academic coaching sessions, we're like, well, we told you 2 weeks ago. We told you last week. And it's like, okay, well, maybe this is the week. We'll say it again. Let's see
Yeah.
what happens.
Yeah. So earlier you brought up expectations, and that was something I wanted to talk about, especially college students. Like there's such this expectation of perfection, and as we know, there's been so many, suicides with students in general, but like student athletes over the past couple years, at least publicly. And so I wanted to talk about that a little bit, kind of the expectation of perfection and the expectation that you have to be everything to everyone. Like, how do you help your students to kind of manage some of those expectations that either they put on themselves or maybe just expectations of parents and professors and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's hard. I'm not gonna lie and sit here and go, oh, this is
Yeah.
something we easily can do. No, it's difficult. But I
Right.
think that one
Hmm.
thing is we always tell our students honesty is the best policy. Like we just want to know. If you get in a situation, something happens, I always joke, we just need to know what size shovel to bring. Like it could be a small one, it could be a big one. Like we just need to know
Hmm.
to help dig you out. And
Yep.
I think it is talking honestly to the student and saying, hey, listen, tell me, tell me your perspective. Because we do a lot of conversation with moms in the beginning to kind of learn mom's side of the story, but really learning where the student is. And we all know, especially when it comes to academics, we're going to have students who excel in the liberal arts courses, English, history, literatures, all of that kind of stuff. Then you're going to have students who really, really excel in their STEM classes and chemistry, math,
Hmm.
all of these things. And we all process information differently. And so we may in our brains go, oh, yes, they are a 4.0 kid. They should be getting a 4.0. Well, when we are into a new challenge, sometimes that expectation is a little high. And listen, I am not saying that you shouldn't have high expectations for your kids. Like, we expect our kids to do the very best at all times, but it's their best. What is
Yes.
their potential, right? Every student is different. And I even think back to like my growing up, my potential is very different than my family members' potential, my siblings. Like that is,
Mhm.
and so it's a hard to separate that sometimes.
Yeah.
And I've worked with siblings before, and I also always had to take a step back and go, okay, your potential is not the same as your sibling's potential. So let's lay this out and say, what is your goal? Let's start there. What is your
Yeah.
goal? And it's not what is your parents' goal? What is your family's goal? Like, what is your intrinsic goal? Which sometimes kids
Mhm.
have a hard time identifying that.
For sure. For
And we have
sure.
to start there. And so there will be sometimes we'll say to students, listen, if you get a B in this class, that's actually the best you're doing. Because this class is
Hmm.
hard. I mean, we had a
Hmm.
student in differential equations. I don't even know what that's about.
What?
Right. Differential, like I don't, some of these engineering classes, I'm like, I have no idea. But you know what? You're
Yeah.
going to do your best. And sometimes the best is, okay, I'm going to get a B in this class because in order for me to get a B in the other class, I have to
Yeah.
move the mark sometimes, right?
For
I
sure.
have to really
Hmm.
shift and think. And, but then we may look at everything and go, okay, great semester. You had, a 3.5. And then that student may come back and go, you know what? I know I had a 3.5, but I really could get a 4.0. And
Hmm.
it's again
Yeah.
back to the point of the student
Yeah.
realizing what their potential is.
I love that. So it's like, and one thing you said too, is you said move the mark. Like it's okay to move the goalposts a little bit. They don't always need
Always.
to be the same for every single class because I think that's where it can get really dangerous that I have to get an A in every class or I have to be the best at everything. And then that's just like not realistic, right? So I love that
Well,
you said move the mark.
Well, I even say that too. Like if someone is training for a 5K for the very first time and they've never run in their whole entire life, that their
Right.
potential is going to be totally different than someone who trains all the time. But then
That's
say,
right.
say you were a cross country runner all through middle school, high school, you're not in college, you took 2 years off. Well, you actually are changing your mark because you
Yeah.
didn't train for 2 years. So your starting point is going
Mhm.
to be very different. But as athletes, our competitive
Yeah.
nature doesn't allow us all
Yeah.
the time to do that. And so I think we have to take a step
Right.
back and go, okay, wait just a second.
Hmm. And I think a big part of taking that step back is having more of an expectation of your effort in the process as opposed to an expectation of the outcome, right? Because when there's an expectation that you have to hit a certain outcome, there's so much that's not in your control that's going to lead to stress, anxiety, this unnecessary pressure. But if you have more of an expectation of, I expect that I'm going to put in this effort, that I'm going to spend the time, the energy, I'm going to have the right attitude, perspective, like the things that you can control. I think that's where we can set high expectations and have it be in a healthy way.
Oh, 100%. And I actually think Coach Mark Rick said it at some point in time that there's two things I can control: my attitude and my effort. And
Absolutely.
right. And that's exactly what you were just saying. And if we can control that, then that's where we can say, okay, what are the expectations out of that effort and out of my attitude?
Yeah, and okay, so the other thing too is like I had just had a call with my girls recently when we talked about perfectionism, and I asked the girls like why do you feel like you have the need to be perfect, or who do you feel like you have to be perfect for? And a lot of them said my parents. And then I asked them like, do you really think your parents expect you to be perfect? And they were like, no. I was like, okay, what do you think they expect of you? That I try my hardest, right? So I think it's important for us to like revisit that, but for parents to show their kid that, hey, like I don't expect you to be 4.0 all the time, to be, all state. Like I don't expect that of you. I just expect that you always do your best, whatever your best is that day. So just like remembering that, because I know parents like it's there, the intention is there, but sometimes I think the way that we talk and speak and behave can maybe give off the wrong idea for the students that, oh, my parents do expect me to be perfect. And then that's just not reality.
Yeah, and I love that you said like do your best for that day because it is like ever flowing. Like my Monday best may be
Oh yeah.
totally different than my Thursday best. And
Oh
we
yeah.
all,
Thursday best. We're up here
yeah, yeah, 100%. And I think that's where
for
we
me at
always,
least.
yeah, we always talk about time management. We always talk about managing our energy, not our time. And that's one thing that when we're
Yes. Oh,
talking about it
beautiful.
is, again, we go back to, okay, my Monday best is totally different than my Thursday best because my energy levels are different. And I think this
Yeah.
is something we talk with students about all the time is as they figure out where their energy is the highest and where they function best, that's where we want to capitalize on it. So I'll have
Mm.
students who say, oh, I am like zoned in from 8 to 10 o'clock every night and I can study, like that's my best study time. Awesome, let's do
Right.
that. For me, personally, 8 to 10, I'm asleep. Like
Me
I
too.
am like you can count it by between 8:30 and 9. I am this is the joke around everywhere is like I'm asleep. So my best is, typically 7 a.m. like 7 to 10. That's
Mm.
when I really am like functioning really high, but
Yeah.
that's not for everybody. And I think that's what we have to remember for our students is when we start to figure out, okay, where's their energy? How can they use that energy best? That actually changes into, wow, I'm actually managing my time a little better. I'm prioritizing a little better because I now know more about myself.
Yeah, I think without energy management, time management is like swimming upstream, right?
Yeah.
It's like we're not factoring the energy piece at all. And I think it's a bit more difficult for a high school student to do this, perhaps, because they have their set classes, they have practice. And so their free time is basically, I don't know, from like 4 to 10 or something, right? It's not as much. How would you recommend like a high school student or middle school student kind of learn about energy management and kind of manage that a little bit better?
Yeah, it's so funny that you talked about that because I had this conversation the other day with a student's parents. She still has two high schoolers, and she's like, I'm trying to figure out, like, is it right after school that we like push through? Is it 6 o'clock at night? I make them sit down
Yeah.
and like do homework. Where is that? And honestly, it's different for every student. If you see that at the end of the day, you have some really light classes, maybe there's some of your electives or nothing that you're stringently thinking with your brain, then maybe that break between school and practice is a really great time to get something done. Maybe you find after practice that actually fuels you up. Like those endorphins and the adrenaline you got after practice, that actually may push you through and go, okay, well, when I get
Mhm.
home, I sit down, I eat dinner, and then I like quickly knock out this homework. I think there's an opportunity for the student to find that, but
Yeah.
it's those parents helping them along the way because
Mhm.
you as parents, we see the students in that environment and we may see, okay, listen, you're falling asleep every single time after practice, right after dinner. There's no way you can do this. So let's reorganize this and say we have
Mhm.
2 hours between, school
Yeah.
and practice. That's
Yeah.
when we need to get things done. Like we need to
Yeah.
really push through and get that taken care of. And that's from
Mhm.
the observation standpoint of it. Again, we're talking about this curiosity of how do we help them navigate that.
Yeah, and I think it just takes like, some experimentation, right? Like, okay, today I'm going to try to do my homework right after school, see how I feel, and then tomorrow I'm going to try to do it after practice, and then kind of just experiment with different times. So I love that answer because that's a problem, or I don't know, maybe not a problem, but a challenge that a lot of the girls I work with, in high school, that's just like I have so much, so not enough wiggle room to try to figure out when to fit things in. So I think just kind of experimenting and making those little tweaks can make a big difference.
But what I also will say too, when they don't have that wiggle room, it's almost like now we're going to work more on intrinsic motivation to get it done. Because it is so structured, we're not having to learn time management because the
Mhm.
how structured it is. You're like, I have 2 hours, I
Right.
have to get this done now. Well, then going
Right.
to college, you now have 6 hours throughout the day. And it's so unstructured that that's kind of when we fall apart, where we don't get to like honor that a little bit because we're not used to
Yeah.
it. So I would even say those high
Yeah.
schoolers now, like really start to recognize that even if you don't have wiggle room on it, start to look at different places of where you can say, oh, well, it only took me 30 minutes to do that right after practice. But when I did that homework after dinner, it took me an hour. And then you can really,
Will you
yeah.
talk and expand? Will you expand a little bit more on, because you brought it up a couple times, intrinsic motivation? There may be some students listening that are like, okay, I hear you, but yeah, just expand on what that means and what are some
Yeah.
examples of it, I guess.
Oh yeah, I think this is the thing that we all struggle with the most. Even like for myself, and that intrinsic motivation is anything that's coming inside of you. Why is it that you want to do something? What is motivating you inside of yourself? And so when we think about extrinsic motivation, so outside, that's going to be the expectations of the people around us. My coach
Yeah.
told me I had to hit, I don't know, a mile in 8 minutes. Well, that extrinsic motivation is I'm going to train because that's what the mark I'm trying to hit. Well,
Yeah.
internally, I may say, actually, I know I can hit 7.5 minute mile. Like I know that's possible. So I'm going to go out and I'm personally going to train, even though coach only wants me to hit 8 minutes. I want to hit 7.5. I'm motivated inside to do that. And so I think those are
Yeah.
all those different types of goals we set for ourselves. And you don't,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's not things you have to tell anybody. Like those are
Right.
the things that are going to really fuel you to get to that because you are feeling motivated internally, not just motivated
Yeah.
by the world around you.
Yeah, and that's interesting you said like you don't always have to tell people, and I'm someone that I kind of will lean away from that a little bit because if I tell people, there's a chance that they're gonna try to plant some doubt, in my mind, and it's like, number one, it doesn't matter what they think, and yeah, so I think that's interesting that some goals are meant to be shared, and some goals you don't need to share with anyone. To like, don't let other people like come in and put their own beliefs on what they think you're capable of.
Oh, 100%.
So
Because
just
I
a
think
little
that,
side note there.
yeah, I think that
Yeah.
also goes where you're talking about accountability. Is if you have someone, accountability partner, or maybe it's a mentor you work with, and you know they're not going to place that self doubt, you know that they're your like biggest cheerleader, then that's the person you share it with. But I'm not going to go like if I'm
Yeah, yeah,
trained,
yeah,
you
exactly.
say it and like, but like if it's me and I'm like, no, I want to do this for myself. So self knows, but nobody else knows. And then when it happens, it's like, oh yeah, see what I did there? Like I like
Yeah, no,
definitely hit
that's
that mark.
you. Yeah, it's definitely like sharing it with the right people. If someone shows you that if there's some little thing that they don't believe in you, then probably don't share your big goals with them. So yeah, I think that's an important distinction is just find those people that believe in you no matter what. And they're like, yeah, I totally believe in you, even if that's this crazy audacious goal. Like find those people that are just like always going to believe in you no matter what. That's huge.
Yeah, I think I could probably speak for both of us on there, even in our business ventures. Like, we don't tell everybody what we're doing because some people will
Yeah.
say to us, well, that's a crazy idea. And so we, like, I know I have a quote unquote board of directors who are just random people in my life where I know I can run by and say, hey, I have this idea, hold me accountable, but don't really say anything, but like just ask me
Yeah.
how it's going. And I know that they're going to cheer me along the way where there's some people if I have a crazy idea, they'll never know until it happens.
Exactly. And that's the way I want
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
It's like, oh, you're so, yeah. I mean, and it doesn't have to be, there's some people in my family that I would tell people and some people in my family that I wouldn't just because of past experience. And I don't feel the need to tell them because I know that their reaction isn't going to be a reaction that I necessarily want. So yeah, I think it's important to find those, whether it's friends, teachers, mentors, teammates, find those people that you can share with and get that belief back and those that you just, they can see when it's all done and said and done, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So I know we're wrapping up on time here, but I'm thinking from a student's perspective, whether it's middle school, high school, college, test taking is something that produces a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. And so I'd love to hear from you, like, what are some different test taking strategies, whether they're more mindset shifts or, tangible strategies that you can share with the students out there that are a little bit nervous around the testing stuff?
Yeah, well, I'm going to speak to this right now from a standpoint of student athlete because
Awesome.
when we think game day and we think big conference tournaments, we think big meets, whatever it is, all of us, because I'm putting myself in this as well, we all have a ritual. There are things that we do every single race day, every single game day. We might listen to the same pump up music. We might go like wear our socks the same way. Like there are things that we do because we have built confidence inside ourselves and it makes us feel good. It makes us feel prepared. All right. Sometimes we call those superstitions and rituals, whatever, but we all have them. Okay. So why are
Right.
we not approaching big tests and exams the same way? Those are the same level of like test or, we're achieving a goal, something. So why are we not going, okay, if I need 10 minutes before a game with my headphones on, playing my music, going through, I'm walking through the steps. If you're a gymnast, you're literally mentally envisioning yourself doing something. If you're a soccer player, you're mentally thinking, okay, I'm going to strike the ball. It's going to go upper right corner, upper left corner, whatever. We're going through that. What if we took that same idea and put it on those tests? If you get really hyped up, you get really anxious, okay, then we're gonna if your school allows, put in our headphones, we're gonna walk to class, we're gonna take a few minutes, tell your friends hey, I'm getting prepared for the test, review your notes, whatever it needs to be, but approach that with the same tenacity that you do game day. Because those nerves,
Yeah. I
those
love that.
those nerves are the same. That anxiety that we're feeling is the
Yeah.
same. It is just in a different venue.
Yep. It is. It's like there's not separate nerves for a test and separate nerves for a game. It's like the same thing. And I just 2 weeks ago had a call with my girls and we talked about mentally preparing before games. And then I was like, you use the same stuff for a test or for a presentation. It's the same. Set your intentions. Do your visualization. It's no different because the nerves, right? And nerves aren't necessarily bad, right? And also don't think your nerves are bad because then that just makes them a problem.
Right.
But yeah, I love it's just approach it like you would a game and just get into find those rituals, get into those kind of routines and habits to help you to build confidence before you sit down in the chair and take the test.
Well, and I think you talked about visualization, which I love, especially before a test, of going, okay, if you're visualizing, here's what I was doing when I worked this problem. Here's what I was doing when I was remember these facts. You are still processing and connecting so many dots that when you get to that point of the exam and you go, okay, oh, I remember this. Let me walk through that. And you go back to the visualization of what you were doing. Practical things would be if you're able to write on the back of the test and as soon as the teacher gives it to you, is to write every big fact that you remember. Write it all out. Get it all in your brain. Get it out before you are clouded with all the other stuff. And then I always say too, if it's a math class or you're doing some stuff and immediately you're looking through the test, which always you should do, always before you even start question one, look through the entire test. Because again, it's like watching film. You're not going to show up to a game without watching the film first. When you sit down and you go to a game, you're looking at what players do they bring with them? Who's their starting lineup? Well, let's sit down and look at this test the same way and go, okay, I've got 10 multiple choice, 4 short answer, 10 true false, and 2 essays. Okay, looking at this, am I going to tackle easiest or hardest first? Right?
Yeah.
And then a lot of times I say, get the easy stuff out of the way so that it gives you time to process some of that harder information. Get a few little wins.
Little warm-ups.
Yes, exactly. Yes, connect the ball to the goal. Let's do a couple of those things because then you become controlled. Again, let's talk about it. If I can control my effort and my attitude, what does that look like? And then you get to take ownership back at that point.
I love that. Those are so good. I wish I would have had some of those strategies when I was still taking tests. Luckily, I don't have to take tests anymore.
Right.
But that's Yeah. Thank goodness. I did enough of those in my day. I love that, Sarah. I mean, this has been such an incredibly valuable conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and I know we've talked a little bit about what you do, to help students, and I'd love for you to, just end it with sharing, where people can find more information about you and your services, and connect with you there.
Yeah, I mean, I love talking to parents. So, like, I actually have where you can do a free discovery call with me if you have questions, you want to work with us, what that would look like. And that's actually available on the website. So, I'm going to drive you guys there first, which is Sarah, Sarahl, Cowart, Cowart.com. You'll find all about us, our coaches, our services there. But then I'm super easy to find on Instagram too. So sarah.l.cowart, you can find us there and connect. Super easy. And then any of our free resources we have. We have a few guides of test taking strategies. We have some guides about how to get your kid through college, all of that kind of stuff. And our new favorite one, we actually call it Worries to Wisdom, because we want to make sure that you feel, as parents feel ready to send their kids to college too. So you can definitely grab that off of our website. And I'll share those
Yeah,
links with you if you want to put them in the show notes.
yeah, you guys can find all those in the show notes. But yeah, Sarah, you have so much valuable like free guides and resources for students and for parents. So make sure you guys go check that out. And also, Sarah, your Instagram, I'm like, how are you so funny and creative? Like you turn this academic stuff into something that is just it's entertaining, honestly, and valuable and helpful. So go check out Sarah's Instagram because
Well, and I will
it's packed with
say
some
it
good.
is not just me behind the screen. I will give my team full credit. I could not do this without them. So just know, but it is, if you can't laugh at what's going on around with the world around you, like we want to have
Yeah.
a little fun while we do all this.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you again, Sarah, for coming on. Super valuable. So I'm excited for everyone to listen and to implement and have an awesome school year. So thanks again for coming on.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks so much.